Good afternoon. I'll just wait for a little while for others to join and then we'll start the session in some time. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So this is going to be a bit of a logistical challenge to try and make this session a little interactive. So what I would request you to do is, if you do have a question or do you want me to, you want to stop me at any point in time, just feel free to just unmute your microphones and just it's okay if you interrupt me. This will also make me feel like I'm not talking to myself. So first of all, uh, is my screen, is the presentation visible? Can I just get a thumbs up on that from everybody? Or if somebody is not able to see it? Okay, excellent, excellent. And so what we'll also do is, So, I may miss out on the chat while I'm looking at the presentation. So what we could do is, like I said, just unmute your microphones and have if you want to stop me and ask me something, feel free to do that. That's not a problem. I would try and like to make this session a little interactive. I understand it's online, so it's going to be a bit problematic to do that. But today's session is going to be on media and entertainment law. We'll focus a little more on what media it is. We're looking at electronic media specifically today. So we're not going to be touching upon the print aspects of the media. How I structured this session is I'll tell you what is electronic media, what are the relevant legislations. Now, the laws that are applicable are, a substantial number of legislations that are applicable for when we talk about media law. But we're going to be touching upon mostly the main sort of legislations which are relevant. We will talk a lot about certain important judgments with respect to media. Most of these judgments talk about the freedom of the press. So that's what the focus will be with respect to what the Constitution stipulates with respect to freedom of expression and freedom of speech and expression. That's what we'll be talking about. Thereafter, we look at certain guidelines also with respect to how the television and other media is allowed to sort of operate. And then we'll get on to what new media is. And towards the end of the session, what we'll do is we'll have a look at all the relevant legislations one by one, and we'll see what what are the applicable clauses with respect to those legislations. As I was saying, when we talk about electronic media, like I said, print media specifically is not what we're going to be addressing today. Okay, so with that, let me just start off. Okay, in order to try and see if any of you can actually answer this without resorting to Google or something, can anybody or would anybody like to volunteer what is electronic media? Feel free to unmute your microphones if you'd like, and sort of venture a guess if you would like to. Anybody? What do you understand by electronic media? And it's okay. You can switch on your camera as well if you'd like. If you'd like to answer that, or you can just type out your answer, whatever is suitable and whatever is convenient for all of you. You can do that. What is electronic media? What do you understand by the term electronic media? I'll give you about 30 to 45 seconds, and then I'll otherwise it'll look very strange me just staring into myself. Anybody? Nobody? Okay. So when we look at when we talk about electronic media, what we are effectively referring to is any media which is sort of disseminating information through the means of electronics or electromechanical devices. Right? So that's your televisions, those are your radios. Then we have something also which is called digital media, which we'll be coming to at the moment. Right? But electronic media basically refers to access to media content, access to information through the means of electronic or electromechanical methods. Right? There's a difference between electronic and static media. So when we talk about static media, we're obviously referring to newspapers, we're referring to journals, books, printed copies of something. When we look at electronic media, we're talking about radios, televisions, computers, communication through the means of the internet as well. That's what we refer to as electronic. Now, electronic is obviously a fairly large term, and it's fundamentally, if you look at it, it talks about use of electricity. Then we come to something called digital media. Now, digital media in itself is different from electronic media to the extent of we talk about digital media in the context of it being a subset of electronic media. So when we refer to digital media, we're referring to, let's say, your computers, your laptops, anything which has the information converted to binary. So zeros and ones, for instance, and that's how the information is stored, or that's how the information is accessed as well. That's what we refer to as when we talk about digital media. Okay? But it is a subset of electronic media in itself. What the media generally refers to is aspects related to the broadcasting, webcasting, narrowcasting, or podcasts, for instance. If anything is disseminated, or it's disseminated through the means of electricity, that's how we refer to. That's what we talk about when we are referring to electronic media. Are there any questions here that you'd like me to answer at the moment? Okay, somebody will have to give some sort of a response, otherwise I'm just going to think that I'm just, talking to myself. Is this clear? All right. Okay. I shall just proceed in this case. Okay. So, sorry. When we refer to the media related legislation, like I said, there are a plethora of sort of laws. It could be somewhere close to about 70 to 80 odd pieces of legislation or just acts when we talk about various media related legislation. Now, like I mentioned, that we will not be talking about the print media specifically. So anything to do with the Press Council of India, for instance, those are legislations that we're not going to be touching upon at all in this particular session. What we will look at is the Telegraph Act, the IPC, the Wireless Telegraphy Act, the Cinematograph Act, Prasar Bharati Broadcasting, the Cable TV Regulation, TRAI, and the Sports Broadcasting Signal. So Copyright Act and the Information Technology Act, which are going to be, obviously the Copyright Act is sort of the most important piece of legislation when it comes to protecting the rights of these content creators. And that's why Copyright Act is absolutely applicable. And the IT Act, from a perspective of how the information, is when it's disseminated, what are the sort of, laws that are applicable with respect to transfer of information online, where it's restricted. Why does the IT Act come into the first instance? We will be talking about that. Like I mentioned, when we're talking about electronic media, we're looking at we're looking at new media as well, which is your internet-based communication systems. So that's why the IT Act is also absolutely applicable. Right? These are the sort of various legislation, but this is what we'll do is towards the end of the session is when we will look at all these legislations and see what are the relevant provisions with respect to this particular legislation, these particular legislation. All right. Okay. Now, there are also certain important guidelines that the government has come out with respect to media. And these various guidelines are, when you're talking about uplinking of channels, of television channels from India, downlinking. I'll come to the terms as to what uplinking refers to, what downlinking refers to. Guidelines for obtaining license for providing DTH. So that's all your Tata Sky, Airtel Home, or whatever those set-top boxes that you have, those are the DTH services. And the guidelines for operation of the Internet Protocol televisions also, which were sort of issued back in 2008. And these are the sort of main guidelines. There are obviously a lot of other guidelines with respect to advertising codes and how the media is supposed to operate with respect to certain restrictions in terms of advertising. So false advertisements, for instance. Those are not the guidelines that we will be touching upon in today's session. We will just be looking at these sort of major guidelines which talk about how media is sort of regulated here. Some of these the media related bodies also, like I would like to sort of touch upon in terms of how these bodies sort of operate. Now, in the context of the media, you have a lot of these bodies which will be self-regulated. Now, would anyone like to venture a guess as to why there's self-regulation with respect to the media in the country? Anybody have an opinion on why there's self-regulation? Okay, is everyone actually here, or are we just not present and I'm just talking to myself now?
So I think they're not responding using the earphones. So
Sorry.
They are not using the earphones or microphones, which is why I think they're not audible to you, or they prefer not using. I don't know what the problem is.
That's okay. I mean,
for type. I'm not
Oh,
wrong.
wait. You know what? I think the problem is I'm not able to see the chat properly. So, oh, okay. Actually, there were a lot of chat messages. I'm so sorry. I didn't have a look at all the chats because I was looking at the presentation.
Yeah.
And I think Varun has just mentioned that there's a little lag in the video as well. Okay. Preeti, can Mr. Santosh just be informed about this? I think that somebody said, Varun has said that there's a lag in the video as well.
Yeah, I'll just get to it. So I think meanwhile, the questions are being raised.
Yeah. Okay, listen, everyone here, I am extremely sorry. I was looking at the presentation and like I said, I didn't pay attention to the chat. So my sincere apologies to all of you. There is information which is Shivanshu has mentioned that is it to allow for more freedom in terms of the specific field of media. So Shivanshu, is your question with respect to when I asked you about why it's not regulated, right? If can I just get a thumbs up from Shivanshu if that is what you're asking? Okay. So it is to allow more freedom because I think one of the most sort of core principles of our democracy has to be with respect to how the media should be allowed to disseminate information. While I do agree that that is prone to being misused and abused as well. But the fundamental premise being that if you regulate the media in its entirety, so in terms of the state telling media what to report, how to report, which in a manner of speaking, depending on the situation, it could be relevant. So case in point would be, let's say, the Mumbai attacks back in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, the 2611, sorry. Back in Mumbai, those attacks where media just went ballistic and they were actually terrorists, handlers back home were able to see what exactly was going on. And, so to that extent, the media should have been thing because in fact, there is actually a sort of strategy by governments as well. Because what they do is it's about media misreporting. So, for instance, if any of you sort of followed the Kuwait war, that was the sort of the U.S. First invasion of Iraq, where the media was actually misreporting, saying that the U.S. troops are withdrawing. The naval fleet was sort of withdrawing, and that's they started sort of reporting that. Now, this is that there was Iraq was sort of emboldened by the fact that they heard that the U.S. troops were withdrawing, and then there was sort of a blitzkrieg, sort of an attack by the U.S. forces on ground. So what happens is that media can be used for that. So that's where the regulation element comes into play, I think. But primarily, yes, the idea is to allow the media to report because any sort of tagging of the media would be detrimental to the for democracy. And Shatakshi has been asked saying because it is easy to govern as no other body has absolute authority, as was also in the recent dispute regarding OTT services. I'll be coming to the OTT services, later when we talk about. I think Shatakshi, are you referring to the Hotstar John Oliver's case? If I can just get a yes or no from you. Okay. I'm going to repeat that. It's easy to govern as no other body has absolute authority. Okay, I'm not too sure what you refer to when you say that no other body has absolute authority. Is it possible for you to sort of try and elaborate what you mean by no other body has absolute authority? You sort of elaborate on
Hello,
that?
sir. Can I use the microphone and answer that?
Sure.
Yes, sir. So by that, I meant that media cannot be absolutely restrained, like it can't be brought within the ambit of the government altogether. Because considering that it stands like in a democracy, as you already like elaborated on that, it's very important. So it can't be restrained or like covered within a particular ambit. However, laws like IT and other other legislations are already in place to take care of it. So that's my point, that's why maybe it's a self-regulated body, so that whatever are the rest of the loopholes that can be covered within the ambit of the law.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. What you also have to sort of keep in mind is that any freedoms that even the media enjoys, and the sort of courts have kind of consistently upheld this view that any freedoms and rights, or even the fundamental rights that the media enjoys, is derived from the Constitution, to the extent that media does not have sort of greater rights than what regular citizens do. Right? So from that perspective, and this is a consistent view amongst the court, where they say that well, you get your rights with respect to freedom of expression, speech and expression from the Constitution. You derive your rights, and those reasonable restrictions which are outlined in Article 19.2, those have to be applicable in any case. So from that perspective, the media does not enjoy a greater sort of privilege or greater set of rights than do ordinary citizens, for that matter. But because the manner and means of sort of the media having to disseminate the kind of information, and of course, I'm not necessarily getting into the ethics and morality aspects of how media has to function at the moment. We will talk about that briefly when we address issues of the trial by media, for instance, what harm that can cause. So we will talk a little about the ethics element of the media at that point in time. But one consistent view, like I mentioned, is that the courts have said that you have your rights. Your rights are restricted to what the Constitution allows, and you do not have greater privileges than what the rest of the citizens actually have. I mean, in terms of from the Constitution. Okay. So, yeah, but more or less, what you mentioned is absolutely right. And yeah, it's not that media, like I said, state-controlled media, for instance. If you see what's with respect to, but I won't say North Korea as much, because that's a different level altogether. But even China, for instance, where it sort of tags and case in point, the information regarding the current pandemic, the state-controlled media sort of restricted a lot of the information flow. And while I'm not blaming any country and I'm not saying anything, but I think the aspects of communication which was withheld initially, that sort of, and on the other hand, even being sort of penalized. Sorry, Anushka has mentioned that my voice is not, it's cracking a little. Okay, and Avni had mentioned provides freedom to express creative content as OTT plans, regulation codes, and other substantive laws like IT laws there. Okay, Avni, and also just excuse my pronunciation of any names. If I get anyone's names wrong, please forgive me. But Avni Jain, you mentioned that OTT platforms have self-regulation codes. Well, that's not entirely true in terms of there are no codes as such. Although the government has stipulated that as of last month, they're going to give all these OTTs, they want to give them about 100 days to come out with self-regulating codes. So as of right now, the over-the-top medias don't have any self-regulation code in place already. There's nothing there as yet. Anushka, am I a little audible now, or is there still a problem with my audio? Okay. Shirish, all right. Shirish has mentioned that law against defamation, laws against obscenity, hate speech are applicable to the media as well. Hence, in a way, we could say that media is indirectly regulated in some aspects. Shirish, you're absolutely right that all these laws do apply. And like I mentioned, that we have whatever restrictions are given on the freedom of speech and expression by virtue of Article 19.2. Those restrictions even apply to things. And as I mentioned, that the consistent view of the courts has been to stipulate that, sorry, media, you do not have greater privileges as opposed to any other citizens, for instance, and therefore there has to be certain reasonable restrictions. Yes, that's right. Shirish, you're right in that sense that there is an element of regulation. But I think what we're talking about, the regulation with respect to we're talking about exact nature of the content, I think that is where maybe sort of kind of saying that there is no regulation to that extent, right? Okay. Also, yeah, I'm just going to go back to my presentation. So, like last time, I kind of missed out on your chat and what you uploaded. So, if there is, if I do not answer immediately, just feel free to sort of unmute your microphone, and I'm okay with interruption. I mean, there's no question about that, no doubt about that. So, in the event I do not answer, or I still think that I'm talking to myself on account of not having looked at the chat, just feel free to sort of interrupt and sort of unmute your mic and just let me know that, please. Okay, so when we talk about the bodies, there is the Electronic Media Monitoring Center, which is a fairly recent sort of body which has been sort of established. And quite honestly, I don't think they're doing a very good job, because even their website was had seemed to be down quite extensively. So I really don't know Electronic Monitoring Media Center not having a functioning website, or a website which is easily accessible. Then you have the Broadcasting Content Complaints Council, which is a self-regulatory body for non-news and general entertainment channels set up by the IBF. So the body has been set up by the Indian Broadcasting Foundation in itself. And you have the NBSA, which is a self-regulatory body for news and current affairs. Now, there is a particular case which I think we'll come to slightly later about that, which is about TV9 having been asked to regulate certain content with respect to what we had sort of presented, and that went up to court, but we'll talk about that slightly later. All right, and then of course, now then you have the CBFC, right, which is very nicely called the Censor Board, but the thing was that the CBFC was enacted under the 1952 Act, Cinematograph Act. In 1981, there was an amendment to the Act where the word Censor Board was replaced, and it became a board of certification. Right? So actually, when you talk about the CBFC, it's not actually a censor board in terms of it's not supposed to censor; it's supposed to certify. So that is what is supposed to happen with respect to the CBFC. Unfortunately, I think it didn't. Sorry, just excuse me 1 minute, please. Sorry. So yeah, I think they just kind of gone ahead with continued with that sort of nomenclature of being called the Censor Board, although they're not the Censor Board, they're a board of film certification. And prior to 1981, of course, they were called the Censor Board, but now they call the Board of Certification. Then you have the Advertising Standards Council of India, again, which is a self-regulatory voluntary organization. Now the CBFC obviously applies to films, right? That's the sort of applicability with respect to CBFC. Then you have the WPC, which was created in '52, and which sort of is the regulatory body with respect to spectrum allocation and planning of how the spectrum has to be allocated and how it's to be managed in the country. So these are the sort of various bodies that we know that sort of regulate various aspects of the media in the. Yeah, Shivanshu had mentioned the certification. Censorship rules were re-Christian certification rules, exactly. So I think the idea was to try and move from the thing that we will censor content to coming to that we will certify content. Now, obviously, like I mentioned, that we've had the board act as a censor board itself, saying that you have to cut this, you have to cut these scenes, whatever it is. And it's like saying that we will decide what content is okay for the citizens of the country, what is not. I know this is going to be difficult to sort of gauge, but how many of you are okay with the idea of censorship of content? And I know it's going to be difficult to get sort of, obviously you can't get a show of hands here, but just if I can get a sense of how many of you are sort of okay with the idea of censorship, or say that the censor board, the certification board should actually be censoring content, and how many are like, oh, I don't think content should be sort of censored in any manner. Is there anybody who has an opinion on this? Should be censored to a certain extent. Okay, so Divya has mentioned there should be minimal censorship. Balanced approach is required. Okay, to an extent there should be some censoring which should be there. Okay, there should be a limit to censorship. All right. Okay. Okay. So so I think there's a sort of mix on the issue of what should be allowed, what should not be allowed with respect to thing. Wait. Okay. Vidushi says do not support censorship. Curtails artistic expression. Excellent. Ashmita is appropriate measure. Age appropriate content. Minimal censorship that does not affect public peace. Censorship for age sensitive content is necessity in relation to Indian realities that may differ from Western notions of it. A balanced view is indeed needed. A complete lack of it is not conducive. All right. Content should not be censored. You can regulate the viewers. Okay, so Pavni has a very interesting sort of thing that you could regulate the viewers. I will come back to that. Content needs to be monitored, but should not be censored at all. The monitoring with respect to what the platform is delivering must be done, especially on news channels these days. I completely agree with you, Varun. Absolutely agree with you. Archita, censorship should only exist when there is no reasonable justification for the content's existence. I think all of you made fairly interesting points, and no reasonable. Harshita has made a very interesting point as well, saying that censorship should only exist when there is no reasonable justification for the content's existence. I think that's a very interesting take, Harshita, that you have. That if you could just, Harshita, you okay to come on the mic now? Then you could just say what do you mean by reasonable justification for the content's existence. Harshita, you can unmute your mic right now.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So basically, I feel that if content is considered obscene or it's considered that it should be censored for a certain part of community, then maybe that should only be done if there is no reasonable justification for its existence. So like if we take an example that if in a movie there is a scene which is considered obscene by some members of the board, and the director is not able to justify that its existence is actually really important to the movie itself, then it can be censored or it can just be certified.
Okay. Okay. So, right. So, firstly, I'm of the view. My personal view is that, and as somebody had mentioned about the artistic sort of expression, that I don't think. I personally don't think censorship should be a thing, because that sort of makes us. I wouldn't really exactly say a nanny state, but if there is freedom of speech and expression, yes, to portray something. There's also the freedom for me to receive that information in the manner I wish. Right now, questions of morality and treatment of that particular subject matter aside, I think when we look at, let's say, artistic sort of creativity, for instance, what is obscene for one is not is totally acceptable for another. Right? So to that extent, when we talk about the sort of balanced views, as some of you have mentioned, where we talk about more about how the certification should allow that, I think that is I think that is absolutely fine in terms of trigger warnings. Actually, oh sorry, Shirish has just mentioned a word called trigger warnings. I think that is super point, Shirish. I think trigger warnings, sort of notifications would be extremely sort of important. Coming back to my point of censorship versus certification, I think we should not be looking at pure censorship and saying that, because it also depends on who sits on the board there, who is the one who's sitting there and deciding. Now, let's say somebody who's an absolutely liberal in their views, if they are sitting there and deciding what needs to be done, they'll pass pretty much anything and everything. it's not likely that their sentiments are going to be hurt by any particular issue, for instance. But you have somebody who leans to a particular sort of ideology, that obviously will sort of create a bias. Now, I don't know how many of you were there in the IT lecture where we spoke about we've spoken about cognitive biases, right? Like I said, that there's bias with everybody, anybody, and everybody has a certain kind of bias, right? So that bias comes into play with respect to what can be shown, what cannot be shown. So where does the line then end? As to is it that there's those 12 people, how many other people are sitting on the board deciding what the rest of the country could view or not? I think that's something which is obviously up for debate. I'm just going to come back to a couple of other points that should not be censored at all. Effective monitoring, all right. Varun had made a good point there. Sahiti has said the MeitY seems adamant on introducing stringent laws regardless, considering the cases complaints that they've been receiving. Censorship laws. Okay. So, when you say the Ministry of Information Technology, are you, Sahiti, if you could just sort of elaborate why you say Ministry of Information Technology or not Ministry of Information and Broadcasting? Is there any particular reason why you've specified the Ministry of Information Technology? And Sahiti, you could come on.
Yes, so good afternoon, sir. Sir, I was fortunate enough to work closely with the legal team of the Ministry of Information Technology, and they are very adamant on introducing stringent censorship laws regardless of, because the cases that they've been doing do seem legitimate. So no matter what we say that censorship shouldn't exist or it should be liberal and all, they are very they are up for censorship basically.
Okay, so they have a fairly conservative approach to what content is being disseminated.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
Okay. Right. So I think so maybe what they're talking about is more because of the new media and possibly from that perspective. Because when we look at the other aspects of content with respect to movies and televisions and serials, whatever it may be, that's obviously under the Ministry of IP, Information and Broadcasting. But thank you, Sahiti, for bringing that to my attention as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yashwardhan had said need for censorship arises out of the presence of content which may not be appropriate for a young mind to watch. However, censorship should not lead to the curtailment of artistic expression, and there should be space for such content to be aired with proper regulations in place. All right, I think that Yashwardhan, you made a very good point as well. Agreeing with Yash, especially when the internet is supposed to be liberal and create a space for all. How do we decide where to set the yardstick in such situations? I agree with Papni on how viewers should be regulated and not the content only. So Vidushi is saying that, but like as Papni mentioned, that when you say regulate the viewers, I think if I'm not mistaken, you're talking about certification to say that, okay, fine, these are the people who are allowed into the cinema, not allowed to the cinema in terms of above 18, below 18 sort of a situation. I think that's what Papni and Vidushi, I think that's what you mean. Even judicial review of verifications often leads to subjective results that may be supported by unjustified false. Okay, Shivanshu, judicial review lead to subjective results. I think that's an important point because we've had a case where Justice Hidayatullah had said something and then Justice Bharucha had said something else. So we will be coming to those particular cases as well. I think that's a good point that Shivanshu has made. Shashank, regulating viewers works in theory. However, Facebook and Instagram also claim regulate the users, but still have a huge number of individuals who just lie about their ages and use the application anyway. Regulation of viewers manifests through simple mechanisms such as simple dialogue box with the question, are you over 18? Which I'm sure a vast majority of people have answered in the affirmative regardless of the age. I think that's, Shashank has raised a very interesting point saying that it's about people lying about their ages and coming onto, content. So in that situation, obviously, the person who's putting in their age and saying that yes, I'm over 18, and actually just creating mechanisms to sort of get onto these different platforms and post whatever it is. I think Yeah, so there is a problem with Facebook and Instagram sort of regulating to that extent. Is there actually, Shashank, if you'd like to comment on this, do you think there's any way of actually determining how the person can be sort of regulated when they have to put up, short of linking it to well, Aadhaar, for instance, do you think there's any way of sort of regulating that element? Shashank, if you'd like to comment on, you could unmute your mic here. All right, Shashank, if you're not here, I don't know. Okay, I'll just continue then. Does the MeitY have any role in censorship of new media content, or is it mere regulation of the mechanism? Shivanshu, is that a question that you wanted to pose to? Wait. So okay, so Shivanshu's question, I don't think MeitY has a role in censorship in itself, but what we can do, for instance, is as was pointed out, that the legal department is looking at making the law stringent. I think it's to do with the fact that they want to sort of, let's say, 66A was held unconstitutional. Maybe they want to propose amendments to the information technology law to try and bring back, say, 66A. I think it's more about the regulation with respect to content thing. How the mechanism of regulating, so for instance, we come to why OTTs are not regulated, for instance, at a later point. But those again would be a little difficult to regulate when you're especially talking about open networks. Right? On closed networks like IPTV, that's why you can have guidelines, but you can't have, I mean, it's difficult, more difficult to sort of regulate content which is open access, for instance. We'll come back to that at a later point. Dia says, I totally agree with Shashank's point, because like even if we did not let you make an ID when you were below 18, but people anyways had access to it, and there was no stringent check on the same. Absolutely. Like I said, it's difficult to sort of enforce that sort of system because how do you actually try and say that you have to prove that you're 18, for instance, right? I mean, do you think, does anyone sort of think that there are any mechanisms available to sort of let think, okay, Shashank, you're going to come back to me in a bit. I was talking about your point on regulating Facebook and Instagram. And I just wanted to ask you, how do you think these platforms can sort of regulate users in a manner where people actually put up what the age is, other than sort of linking it to their Aadhaar?
So it becomes incredibly problematic if we're going to try linking Aadhaar with aspects such as entertainment, because there's already been like an incredible amount of backlash with linking Aadhaar with bank accounts or anything else. So I think that it becomes slightly infeasible at this point as a government to come and say that if you want to use social media or if you want to use the internet, then you have to provide certain details for such veracity to happen. And this will also further reduce the amount of accessibility that people have to electronic media. So for all of these reasons, I think it's kind of improbable for anyone to suggest that we can regulate the viewers with respect to all the content that's watched. Furthermore, Pavni also said that if we use this logic, then we're assuming that they don't have other places to get such information. My problem is that they do, right? And hence, that is why regulating viewers doesn't happen. Because if they do want to regulate such viewers, the viewers will obtain such information from other places anyway. The reason why censorship becomes important is mainly because of the fact that these people who make such decisions to view content which is not sensitive to their age may be drastically affected by it, regardless of whether they choose to voluntarily make this decision or not. So at this point, if we can't enforce this control over regulation of viewers to a great extent where it will be successful, it is not like a feasible idea which the government can implement as of right now.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. I think that those are some really great points that you made, and as you pointed out, and Pavni mentioned also that you can get access to things. And this what we're talking about right now is, let's say, on open platforms, right? And so even if, let's say, the government blocks any content here, access to the content is going to be fairly simple. All I have to do is, instead of using Chrome or Brave or Explorer, I just use Opera to access the content because Opera has a built-in VPN. So it is possible for me to access all the content in any case. So you're right to the extent that it is, at least especially in the age of the internet, it is going to be very difficult. So I think that's why you don't find as much regulation with respect to new media or let's say internet-based systems as you do, with respect to televisions and movies and things like that. Okay, 1 minute. What's it? Dia, you have a question for Shashank? Stance towards suggestion of linking Aadhaar to such platforms and age group. I think Shashank has already mentioned that it's not really feasible to do that. It's not. There's going to be a big out, especially in systems like ours where Aadhaar is not sort of such a secure sort of system in any case. So I think there is going to be a huge problem with respect to trying to regulate people who get onto social media as well. And like I said, it's fairly simple to access content as well. So even regulation of the content or regulation of the individual itself becomes that much more difficult. Lucy, I agree with the concern Shashank has raised, how lack of mechanisms to actually regulate the viewers should not deprive the people who are lawfully and rightfully accessing the content. I think, yeah, so I think Vidushi, what you're talking about is sort of a balance that you're trying to create, saying that just because some people should not have access to content doesn't mean everybody should be sort of punished for it. So I think, in a manner of speaking, we're looking at sort of a collective punishment system where the government, for instance, will say that, hey, listen, you know what, it's difficult for us to put in systems into place to regulate X class of people or X age or whatever it may be, and therefore we will regulate everybody. So I think that sort of ties into the element of collective punishment sort of concept, where instead of the group of people being regulated, or for whatever reason, whichever group or whatever it may be, the entire class of people are regulated completely in terms of everybody's has to sort of adhere to those various principles. Dia says, no, sir, I was answering to the part where he was asking you to repeat the question. Oh, okay. Right, sorry. I think these are sort of slight logistical issues with respect to online classes. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk for another 5 minutes, and we have sort of completed about 45 minutes. And as is the case with regular class, I like to do this as well, where I don't mind if all of you want to take about a 5-minute break, quickly get your coffees, teas, beers, whatever it may be, and we can come back if you'd like to do that. If I wouldn't mind getting myself a coffee just now, it's right here, so it doesn't matter. Okay. Shatakshi says, what is the nature of these media-related bodies, as in its composition and appointments? So, okay. So, with respect to the CBFC, for instance, that's regulated by the Act in itself. Right? But for instance, these other bodies which are self-regulatory, these bodies will sort of come together and decide between themselves as to how will they sort of appoint. I'm not too sure of these self-regulating bodies, but what happens is that, as is the case with any society, for instance, a society or trust or whatever body is formed, where they establish maybe members of the society, and then they probably have voting procedures to say that, okay, fine, you will be you will be a president for the term, or you will be chairman for a certain amount of time, or whatever it is. But yeah, with CBFC, for instance, those are obviously government appointments because these are private corporations. Sahiti, you're asking about private corporations, about these media bodies, these other bodies, right? Yeah. So they would be private bodies in terms of they're not appointed by the government. The government doesn't have anything to do with their appointments, for instance, nor does any regulation specify as to how these individuals will be appointed in. And that what we're talking about is more about, let's say, the Advertising Standards Council, the Broadcasting Complaints, and the NBSA. These are the bodies that we're talking about, which will be sort of regulated in a manner between members of that particular organization itself. So yeah, to that extent, they're private corporations. The others will be appointed by the government under the under the Act, for instance, or let's say the WPC is under the Department of Telecommunications. So the DOT will decide as to who becomes members of WPC, for instance, right? So it entirely depends. So it's not a uniform element to how things are regulated with respect to these bodies. All right. Okay. So let's do one thing. Can we, if all of you are okay, may I just quickly sort of come back in about 5 minutes? Is that okay? Is that all okay with all of you? Oh, yeah.
Yes, sir, that works.
Okay. Right. So see you guys in about 5 minutes, or hear you guys, or listen to your chats in 5 minutes. All right. Back. Okay. So what we're going to get on to now is certain sort of important judgments with respect to freedom of the press and what the courts have generally held. There are quite a substantial number of cases, so I'm not going to get into the sort of facts of every case. But what we could do is once we finish this particular session, if there is any specific case that you want to sort of discuss, we can come back to that particular case. And we're just going to start with cases from back in 50, which is Brij Bhushan and State of Delhi, and another one was Romesh Thapar and State of Madras. Now, I mean, fundamentally, this is very interesting because there's been a sort of consistent view with respect to the Supreme Court in this back in 50, because on the one hand, Brij Bhushan was a publisher with respect to the RSS ideology, and the other case, Romesh Thapar, was a publisher with respect to left-leaning communist sort of ideology, which was critical of Nehru. But both these were, regulations which came into play, which sort of sought to prevent them from, publishing and sort of wanted to sort of pre-censor the content in itself. But when the matter went up to the court, went into the Supreme Court, was actually filed under Article 32. Court had a very consistent view and said that public order was not enumerated exception to the right to free speech, so under Article 19.2, and that a law which restricted speech on the ground that it would disturb the public order was unconstitutional. Okay? There was a very consistent view that the courts took with respect to Brij Bhushan case as well as the Romesh Thapar case, where the idea that it would disturb whatever the content was, would disturb public order, was not something which was exception to the right with respect to free speech. This was a sort of, how the courts have sort of fundamentally held aspects of the freedom of the press with respect to what exceptions are provided for under Article 19.2 of the Constitution. This was a fairly important case with respect to the classification of films, and this was a challenge to the Section 5, I think, of the Cinematograph Act, and about the certification element of thing. The constitutional validity of the act was challenged by K.A. Abbas, and the Supreme Court ruled that prior censorship fell within the reasonable restrictions permitted on free expression, and that the act was sufficiently clear to avoid arbitrary exercise of powers therein. So here, what had happened was that there was film that K.A. Abbas wanted to release was censored, and this is important because if you see that 52 Act, it was actually called the Censor Board. Right? So there was an element of censorship with respect to thing where the certification was to be given was for adult content only, so that A certification was required to be given. But what K.A. Abbas stated was that it's unconstitutional in terms of it impinges on his freedom of thing, and therefore wanted to hold the act in itself unconstitutional. Case in this situation, the Supreme Court has held that no, act is not unconstitutional in itself, and there are these reasonable sort of provisions which are allowed under the act in terms of classification of the movies into separate categories of whether it's universal, U is I forget what exactly, unrestricted viewing or unrestricted with supervision, so that's or adult content. Right? So here the court held that nothing doing, that there is no, it's not unconstitutional in itself. Any sort of censorship or asking for cuts is not unconstitutional in terms of the act is not unconstitutional, and the bodies are allowed to censor. Keep in mind here that the body was called the Censor Board of Censors up till 81. It was called the Board of Censors in any case, right? So the courts were sort of more of the view that it can be, classifications can be made with respect to movies, movies and films and whatnot. Okay. Here, this is another instance of where the community whose sentiments were hurt wanted to take producers to court because, like I said, the petition was seeking a restraint on the exhibition of Bandit Queen on the ground that the depiction in the film was abhorrent and unconscionable and a slur on the womanhood of India, and the rape scene in the film was suggestive of the moral depravity of the Gujar community. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Bandit Queen, but it's a true story of how Phulan Devi became known as the Bandit Queen, and it started with that because she was abused. Now, here the court upheld the sort of rating that was given in terms of that it is more to do with supervised sort of aspects of the movie. So the certification rating was given was upheld, but the court did stipulate that the manner in which any creative expression is sort of put forward, how the message is put forward, is more important. Is very, very important. I think this comes back to when we were talking about earlier about the artistic expressions or the creative expressions as to how people project something or as using any medium. How that information is projected is probably as important as what the message is in itself, right? So obviously, if let's say a scene of a rape scene which is put forward, which is presented in a movie, has been put forward to sort of communicate a message, for instance. Right? What this case seems to suggest is that the court should be of the view that it should be allowed, and it should not be sort of merely cut out because it amounts to depravity or shows a woman being degraded, for instance. Right? Now, how many of you here would sort of have that view with respect to, let's say, scenes of sexual assault or sexual abuse in movies? How many of you would say that it should just be allowed, or the manner in which it is allowed is more important than anything else? Anybody? Okay. So, as Shirish had suggested earlier, that such scenes, along with a trigger warning, can be allowed. To further the plot of the film and its impact on the whole art should be valid. The message, it should be allowed. All right. Possibly monitored because scenes as such can be very triggering to few people, and that must be taken into account. All right. So Shreya, you said that because this can be very triggering to individuals, and I completely agree with that. And as Shatakshi pointed out, that Shirish had made the suggestion saying that you should have trigger warnings for the. But law aside, how many of you think that when you go in for a movie, for instance, when you're watching a movie in a theater, for instance, trigger warnings would be useful, or would be useful in terms of can that be is that viable? Okay, so you're saying there will be very. So in a manner of speaking, you're saying that let's say when people show smoking on screen, you have that thing. Instagram. So okay, I'm not on Instagram, so I don't know how Instagram uses trigger warnings. Is that something that the user has to put up, or is that regulated by the platform itself? Pavni?
Oh. So it's regulated by the platform itself.
So the platform regulates thing. So that means that there's an algorithm which determines that the content is needs a trigger warning.
Yes, sir. Like
that
if you view content which is maybe like, you know, there's a lot of sensitive issues involved around it, or sensitive to certain community, it gives you a trigger warning that you're about to see it. So would you want to proceed with it or not?
So in that sense, I mean, is it the user who has to specify that there is sensitive content, or is it to do with, I mean, the platform identify? Because
no, sir, the platform itself identifies with respect to the images shown or the content of the video that has been shown.
So the platform doesn't. No, you're saying the platform identifies that it is something which requires trigger warning.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's interesting because you know, I mean, and I'm just going to try and you know, relate it to how you know, as let's say as somebody who posts on Instagram, how the image that I may be showing, you know, to have an artistic expression. It could be, for instance, you know, something to do with nudity, for instance, right? How does every artistic expression then get regulated by the platform? Because that is very interesting to me. I mean, I'm not on Instagram.
So as far as
sorry, tell me.
Sorry, so as far as I'm aware, complete nudity or obscenity, I think so, they don't allow you. They report. Actually, they don't allow you to publish it. After a few hours, they report. But apart from that, if there's something related to, like as far as I've seen as the news content or anything related to general knowledge or something, they do even like you say global warming pictures that come out and which are very sensitive for certain people to view. They do provide a warning before that.
Okay. Okay. Now I think Gayatri has asked that you know, doesn't Instagram categorize sensitive materials based on how many people have reported it? And Ashmita says, okay, it's on the basis of reporting. And Sparnika also says that nudity is usually reported by the users of Instagram. So I think this is a mix and match. Then possibly it could be that because
sir.
Yeah.
Hi, Shivanshu here, sir. So I think so. What actually happens with Instagram, like someone just mentioned that some people report it and then they look into the matter. It could happen both ways, that they just land upon. Like I've researched a bit on it. So what I understood was, at least with Facebook, which I think also applies a significant amount to Instagram as well, that they'll first either they'll do random searching as well. And along with random search, they will also have, of course, the reports that are made to them, and on the basis of that, they decide. But for instance, like you talked about nudity, even if it's not complete nudity, if it's not complete nudity, it might be acceptable. But then that again also leads to a lot of subjective analysis of what is appropriate and is not appropriate. And I actually had one question related to that, which also ties in with the Bandit Queen case. So if let's say we have nudity on Instagram to some extent, supporting a certain message, a social message, let's say, but combining that with the judgment of Bandit Queen as well, which says that nudity to a certain extent is acceptable as far as it furthers the plot of the movie or the message that the movie is trying to portray. But what also happened in the Bandit Queen case was, inevitably it meant that messages which have a social cause attached to them may be furthered, but an artistic expression just for the sake of expression is not acceptable.
Okay. Yeah.
So how does the Indian law on this, because even the guidelines themselves on certification state that exemptions might be made to principles that are laid down within the certification rules on the basis of the message that the movie or the film is trying to portray. So,
so in
do you
this,
think then a substantive change would be necessary in the law itself, like the legislation? Or is this something that can be remedied by, let's say, just the approach of the board itself or judicial review?
So I think, okay, now in this situation, I'll just come first to your first part of the question thing, that when you're talking about, let's say, social media, right? How is that regulated to that extent? So when we talk about, let's say, social media, if it's on Instagram or whatever it is, and how this information is treated, obviously you don't have legislation which will be applicable in this situation is going to be your Information Technology Act, in one instance. Now, as a platform, the social media like Facebook or Instagram, for instance, they would be classified as intermediaries, right? So, as if a complaint goes to an intermediary that it's in violation of any particular law, for instance. So, if it says that it's obscene, which is I think section 67, if I'm not mistaken, material which is obscene in nature, for instance, then the intermediary's responsibility would be to sort of, determine whether the content is, violating any specific Indian legislation or it's not in violation of any law, right? So to that extent, the intermediary itself is thing. Now, the intermediary, would you have to look at it from the perspective of, the Article 19(2), for instance, or the exceptions to free speech. So does this fall within any of the exceptions, or can it be classified as free speech in itself, right? Free speech and expression. So if it doesn't fall within the ambit of 19(2), then it should be allowed. It would be allowed. But if there's a determination made that it is going to be, in violation of, it falls within the exception of 19(2), then obviously there's got to be, content has to be taken down. But regulation of the content in itself, to a certain extent, is available in terms of means of getting the content removed, is available to you, where you can, cite whether it's hurting religious sentiments or hurting other sentiments or whatever it may be. So the legislation is available to you. You can even file under IPC, for instance. I think as of yesterday, the Rajasthan High Court has quashed that FIR against Twitter, where there was a image of somebody who posted on Twitter saying, "Smash Brahminical patriarchy." I don't know how many of you remember that particular case which was filed against in Rajasthan. The High Court has dismissed that, saying that it doesn't really hurt anyone's sentiments as such. So everything has to be done on a case-to-case basis. I don't think you can look at everything just being sort of categorized as one aspect of it. Now, let's say an artist who puts up something which shows whether it's nudity or wants to show that, let's say the ground realities of abuse, for instance, right? And depicts, let's say, the number of cases of abuse, of sexual abuse, in art form, right? As opposed to somebody who's uploading images of, beating, a man beating a woman. Now, the intent would also matter here, right? In terms of, my intent was to communicate to the public that I want to show that there is a real problem of sexual abuse in the country, domestic abuse, for instance, right? Other person may be uploading something to show that, to uphold patriarchy, for instance, to say that women need to be shown their place. But the message is very different in these two cases. One is to create awareness. One is to say that, men rule, for instance, right? So both these cases would have to be treated differently. You cannot club them into the same sort of category and say that because both of them are talking about abuse and therefore it is detrimental to a particular community or whatever it is, that they have to be treated equally. In the same message, you cannot sort of say that these two messages are exactly the same because they're very different, right? So I think from that perspective, it's not going to be really easy to just kind of give it broad strokes and say that this is how it should fall under, this is how it should fall, what should be categorized as, but treat it in for what the message is, right? Does that answer your question, Shashank?
Yeah, sir. One more thing, just adding on to that question itself. So what happened as well with the Bandit Queen case was that the court actually accepted the argument that since 3 out of the 4 members of the board that sat on the specific case were women.
Yeah.
In the Bandit Queen case.
Right. So yeah, so the court, yeah, I mean that's true because that I think also made a difference there, and thanks for pointing that out because that I think made a difference as well because they said that if 3 women were on the panel and who had certified this film and said that it's okay to present this, then they're not really. I think court, yeah, you're right, Krishna, the court looked at it from that perspective.
Do these practical considerations actually make a significant difference in I mean, see, this was an argument that was accepted before a court. So I would imagine that if something as such is accepted, there would be a lot of practical considerations which are made by the board during its actual analysis. So is that something that actually happens a lot?
Well, in an ideal situation, everything is going to be considered. But now what's also happened is that the appointments have become fairly, well, I'd say political in nature, right? And I think for Prasoon Joshi, the chairman of the board was that person's name. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name, but had an extremely conservative viewpoint when it came to his job as chair of the board. Yet, if you went back and saw the kind of movies that he had made, I mean, they're the first ones that should have been censored, if you want to, kind of movies that previous chairman had made. I forget. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. It's not coming to me at the moment. So it also depends on the. Sorry, can you hear me? I mean, sorry.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. So no, what I was saying is that so it also depends on the individual who has been appointed to that. Right now, if that individual decides to toe the line of an extremely conservative government, right, that's what's going to happen. And then the courts will have to get involved, and the courts will have to say, what needs to happen or whatever it is. So maybe practical realities are very different from what the ideal situation should be, because the appointments have become so political in nature that the CBFC now wants to just sort of will say that, okay, fine, the government line is this, and we will take that particular government line. So if it is Prahlad Nirani, thank you so much, Vidushi. Yeah. So from that perspective, while the ideal scenario would have been to sort of say that, okay, fine, you have equal representation. If something is showing, then obviously in that situation, the courts will take the view of let's say the members of the board as well. The courts will not just right?
All right. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
I mean, I'm just going to go back to some of the chat. They post some sensitive content. Okay, just coming back to the trigger warning, I think, there is an interesting point about that it is a trigger warning with respect to smoking. I mean, not trigger warning, but moral policing with respect to smoking. The same should be applicable. I think that is a good way of treating this the issue of abuse and having trigger warnings on content as well, where you can think. Although I think the trigger warning in these situations may get a little difficult, because difficult to the extent that what's happening is a film is a continuous sort of process. Now, the idea of a trigger warning is to let people be aware that, listen, if you do not wish to watch this, you have to now, or don't proceed. Right? I think one practical difficulty with respect to trigger warnings on a medium such as a film or a video is that, especially let's say in theaters, for instance, how does that trigger warning actually work? Because does the trigger warning come 5 minutes before the thing? Now that then feeds into the issue of how the artistic expression is to be sort of put forward in terms of the movie continuity, for instance, could be lost, because then what's coming 5 minutes later. Because putting a trigger warning just before the event happens, does it actually? And I'm free to I'm open to a criticism and feedback here, or absolute contradictions as well. A trigger warning just before the event, does it actually serve the purpose of a trigger warning? So my concern would be when the trigger warning happens and its impact on the practical reality of a trigger warning, as opposed to the issue of artistic expression in terms of letting viewers know what is coming in the first instance. Anybody would like to venture any thoughts on this? Okay. So I think, sorry, Grishma has already mentioned that, sorry. The choice to really decide to agree with the suggestion as well. Viewers should know in advance, probably at the start of the film itself or the time of purchase of tickets. Okay. So again, let's say they know well in advance. Doesn't that eat into aspects of the plot of the movie, for instance? Shouldn't the, I mean, wouldn't the idea be that, okay, fine, you know, there's not really an aspect, because let's say that specific element of abuse, what if it is one of the main components of the storyline in itself? Giving that away, does that then create issues, for instance? So anybody who would like to venture a guess in that respect? I mean, Grishma, you could, I think, since you had mentioned that point, or Shirish?
Sir, I was saying that the trigger warning does not have to actually describe what kind of abuse is there. Just the word abuse, I don't think does. I mean, it would do much to disclose the plot. Just very simple trigger warnings like abuse or suicide or murder. Some kind, just single words. That's all. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so you're saying that, I mean, some element of a warning should be made available so that the choice is there or to, that means that the this would actually then actually, let's say, a film specific issue, this would actually have to happen before even the trailer then.
Yes. Correct.
It would have to happen before the trailer as well. Then. Okay. Okay, no, good point here, because I think that makes sense. You know, trigger warnings are important to have. I definitely agree with you, regarding that. So I think those are good points that you're making in terms of, yeah, maybe element of CBFC should be to say that, you know, we will certify your film as long as you, if you're showing abuse or violence. But I think violence is generally there is in the certification itself, right? That's generally mentioned that there's, or like let's say Netflix. If you're looking at anything on Netflix, it says violence, nudity, abuse, all that is already mentioned on Netflix, any of the Netflix series as well. Right? Okay. Shirish, you said that when Hurt Locker came out, most people already knew it possibly contained violent scenes. All right. So yeah. So I'm guessing that's to do with the movie, The Hurt Locker. I don't remember watching that one, or I must have seen that one. But I guess the name itself gave it away. Shreya had said maybe trigger warnings can also encompass other elements which can hurt people, which is not related to abuse-based scenes. Find the ambit of trigger warning. Shreya, could you just unmute and just kind of elaborate on what you mean? Encompass other elements?
Yeah. Hi, sir. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Sir, actually, my point came from a very from a perspective where it wanted to address issues for people who are disabled or people who have health-related problems. Like, you know, there are a lot of films or a lot of documentaries which might have, let's say, for an example, flashing lights as a part of the scenes, which can actually trigger people in different ways. Like many people have epilepsy or photograph-based seizures. So like that can really actually this point kind of came from an ableist perspective where I wanted to address that maybe if trigger warnings can also encompass disabled rights, that would also be very meaningful to the, I don't know, the ambit of.
Yeah, no, I think Shreya, it is a very important point that you've raised. I'm just wondering, does if you've gone through the Rights of Persons with Disabilities 2016 Act, does it specify anything on those lines in terms of that any medium or any content needs to kind of cater to persons with disabilities as well? Have you come across that by any chance?
I actually haven't. And I've also gone through some media where there have been flashing lights without any trigger warnings given prior before. So maybe there might not be anything existent in that.
Okay, oh, that's an interesting point that you raise. I think because these are sort of thing. So I'm now going to play.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Shreya. So I am going to play a bit of a sort of, in a manner of speaking, a devil's advocate, if you will, where I just want to ask, so in terms of let's say aspects of trigger warnings and things, when when does it when is it enough, or does there come a point when it's actually enough? Because see, what all of you raised are very interesting points about a generic warning, for instance, specific to the product. Okay, so violence, abuse, aspect of that what Shreya mentioned is also a very, very important point. I think I'm personally of the opinion that these warnings should be in place, but I'm just trying to give you another perspective of, let's say, somebody else from thing. At what stage does it become, say that we are not I mean, that's the ambit of warnings that can be given, right? Does it happen in such a manner that it could one after the other sort of warnings have to come to that extent where it's initially or before the certification or before sort of the trailer itself that there are whole plethora of warnings? So anybody okay, Gayatri has mentioned something. Lot of one minute. Okay, so Gayatri said that a lot of movies already have that. I remember The Incredibles 2, which had a warning stating that flashing lights will instrument so and people with conditions that triggered with flashing lights should take note. Okay, yeah, no, actually, I get the point in terms of they have that. But I'm asking as to what extent of warnings can be. So, is there a possibility that because let's say a movie has a range of social issues to cover, right? Including aspects of warnings for, let's say, persons with disabilities. It could be about the movie could be about treatment of animals, cruel treatment of animals, for instance, right? And yes, movies say that no animals were harmed in the making of this movie, for instance. But let's say a movie plot which showed a whole bunch of different issues, right? Which could be different viewpoints for different people. So at what stage do we come to and say that, okay, fine, is there a possibility of giving just a general warning, saying that everything is included? Or do these warnings have to be specific? And how do you tie it into elements of artistic expression or creation? Anybody want to venture a thing? I get your point, Gayatri, but my question was slightly different. Yeah, general warning should be a basic necessity. Okay, I think that's fine. General warning can be. But when we're talking about trigger warning, these are aspects which are very particular, right? So a trigger warning, the idea of a trigger warning is that this specific aspect is going to cause an issue. I think they have to be specific, because how do I, as a viewer, assert something will affect me or not? Okay, warnings can be more informing to those in purpose better. All right, Pratna, that's right. Warning that covers all issues at once. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So my point is, like, that when we talk about trigger warnings, now the idea of a trigger warning is that one particular aspect of what you're about to see or hear is going to cause you distress, right? Or in the case of thing that flashing lights are going to be used or whatever it is, right? So that's the idea of a trigger warning. So a general warning saying that all these are going to happen do not necessarily serve the purpose. So I do mean that when you have a general warning, which I don't think serves the purpose, or then how many trigger warnings can you have in one movie in itself? So that is where I think concern would arise. And I'm talking, let's say, on behalf of a producer or director or whatever, as the case may be. So there is where it could be problematic. I'm not saying it cannot be done. Okay, Harshita, you said specific trigger warnings should be given in the trailer only. Okay. Shatakshi said awareness regarding these things during the promotion of movies itself has been serving the purpose too. Okay. So Harshita and Shatakshi, you're saying basically at the time of the trailer or movie promotions or whatever it is. Okay. Right. So yeah, somebody's
sir.
Yeah.
So maybe if triggering events within the movie itself, which actually affect someone's physical or medical condition, for let's say epilepsy, I think for those you will need to have warnings within the movie itself. But larger issues that have been dealt with in the movie, let's say depression or self-harm or something of that kind, which might trigger people, might not necessarily be entirely based on one scene, but could be on the entire movie as a whole. So those issues perhaps could be dealt with when you're buying the ticket, or even if you want to do it before, where you're doing it in the trailer or anything of that sort. I think both, you'll have to have a comprehensive set of warnings, right? You can't just have one, like you can't just have someone say that there are scenes with flashing lights. You can't just say that in the trailer or before the movie begins, because someone might still go and watch the movie even if they have something, a medical condition of that kind.
Yeah, and here again, now Vidushi has raised an interesting point again, where she said that warnings should be placed in such a manner that do not compromise on the plot or storyline. And I think that's an interesting point as well, because a number of warnings. Like I said, I'm just talking about a situation where the movie covers a plethora of issues, right? I mean, it addresses a lot of different social points. It talks about a lot of different issues of abuse, mental, physical, related to animals, whatever it may be. Anything that could be a trigger for individuals, right? So that then has an element of compromising the plot or storyline. Also, it could be possible that could happen. Filmmakers cannot be expected to give out all the details to make the movie interesting to the viewers. Exactly my point. That at what stage, because if you say that these trigger warnings happen at this point in time and this happens at this point in time, but Shivanshu, I think, raised an interesting point, saying that plot of the movie could be about general abuse, so that information can come, and something which is specific can be given specific trigger warnings. Again, so this is interesting discussions that we can have around this, but I don't know whether there is actually a solution. Okay, Rashi has said, yes, I agree with Shivanshu. So many warnings compiled together and shown at the same point, it will be difficult to understand and respond to that. All right, yeah. So that is going to be difficult to sort of think. But so does it then become the job of the certification board, or how does that sort of happen? Again, here the certification board, unfortunately, is not really they're more interested in talking about how you cannot show nudity and you cannot show abuses and things like that. I think abuses, as in I'm talking about verbal abuse, for instance. Movies have verbal abuses, for instance. I think, unfortunately, the CBFC is more interested in those aspects rather than talking about different elements and different trigger warnings. So such time that the CBFC decides that let's look at other aspects as well, I think it is going to be difficult to think. I think this, any aspects of warnings or trigger warnings especially, I think it also comes from producers and directors who are a little more socially minded. They may say that, okay, fine, these are aspects which are going to be detrimental or could have an impact on individuals, and therefore we should be careful about how we portray it, or if we have to portray it because it's important to the plot line, then how do we enable information to reach the audience prior to that. But again, I'm coming back to Vidushi's point that it should not make the movie uninteresting as well. All right. So just kind of move on to next judgment. Okay. So this is 98. Again, Supreme Court. There's a serial titled "Honi Unhoni." And the petitioner challenged the exhibition on Doordarshan. Now, this is on Doordarshan because before 95, and we will be coming to that case as well. Before 95, obviously, all the airways which were owned only by the government, I mean, they're still owned by the government, still a public property in terms of it's owned by the government. But everything was obviously Doordarshan oriented. We were at a point where we didn't have private news channels coming in. Like I would say the mid to late 90s. So Doordarshan was the one which was showcasing everything. It was obviously under the government. Now, petitioners are challenged that showing the serial in Doordarshan called Honi Unhoni was encouraged superstitious and blind faith amongst viewers. But the petition was dismissed as the petitioner failed to show evidence of prejudice to the public. So how did it affect the public? The petitioner could not show. The Supreme Court had said that the right of a citizen to exhibit films to the state on the state channel is part of the fundamental right guaranteed under Article 19(1)(a). So again, like I said, the idea is that showing something to the public amounts to your freedom of speech and expression. Now, does it amount to prejudice if it encourages superstition or not is something which will be left to sort of, again, the manner in which the sort of thing is, the case is, the content is created. So you can't have a blanket ban and saying that, no, this promotes superstitions and therefore we cannot show it, right? So I think, you do have a lot of people fighting against superstition, but that's more to do with how, individuals are claiming that they can do a lot of things, and people go around sort of busting myths. When you talk about serials or movies which show certain aspects of superstition, it doesn't really, amount to creating, issues in the mind of the public saying that, oh yeah, that means I will become superstitious if I watch a movie or something like that. Right? So this is something which the court has said that it amounts to a fundamental right with respect to freedom of speech and expression. Okay. Yeah, this is again an important case regarding the screening of a serial called Tamas on the ground that it violated Article 21 and 25 of the Indian Constitution and Section 5B of the Cinematograph Act. It was based on a novel of Bhishma Sani, which depicted the events in Lahore immediately before the partition of the country. The two judges of the Bombay High Court saw the film and rejected the contention that it propagated the cult of violence. Right? And the Supreme Court agreed with the High Court and emphasized the need to encourage the telecasting of the film and television as it is a powerful medium. So here in this particular case, the Supreme Court had sort of said that dissemination of the information, basically, how do you sort of present the information, because newspapers have a limited reach in terms of circulation, but you have media like your radio and television have a much wider sort of audience and much wider reach which is there. So obviously disseminating all the information basis that is again very important, because like I said earlier, the right to freedom of expression is not only about expressing yourself, but it's also about how I receive that, how I'm able to receive that information, right? That's also a fairly important aspect of your freedom of expression, speech and expression. Okay. Yeah. This was what I was talking about. That in the LIC versus Manubhai Shah, freedom of expression and freedom of speech and expression includes freedom to circulate and propagate views to electronics media, subject to reasonable restrictions. Again, coming back to 19.2. Right extends to use the media to answer the criticism leveled against the propagated view. Right? So here it is that if I'm being questioned about something, or if I'm putting forth a view, right also extends to sort of how that information is. Sorry, Vidushi, you saying he recognized television as a powerful medium, have an effect on the masses. Then how do we justify films like Kabir Singh? Okay, I haven't seen Kabir Singh. I've only heard the issues surrounding that, where they showed. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the plot line is about an abusive boyfriend who goes around slapping his girlfriend all the time. Is that what the movie is about? I haven't seen the movie, so I presume it was to do with that, right? It was about violence against women. Was that the context of the movie? I mean, plot line of the movie? Okay. So, well, like I said, the CBFC sort of obviously gave it a certification. Oh, okay. So, Dushi is saying, you're saying that the movie is about that, but Harshita is saying it's not exactly about that. So, like I said, I haven't seen the movie, so somebody will have to tell me what plotline was. Like I said,
So the movie, so it portrays to be a film, movie about romance and about a guy who's facing difficulties in his life. But the movie essentially has underlying instances of abuse that he doles out against his girlfriend in the movie. And there is one scene where he does slap her. I have seen the original version. I've not seen the Hindi version of the movie, but that was the plot largely. So the problem was not necessarily with. So like.
Sorry, your speech is cut off. Okay, I think we just lost Shivanshu. I mean, in terms of speech is cut off, Shivanshu. So I'm not able to hear you. But okay, Vidushi, violence under the garb of love. Especially in a country like ours where a lot of viewers are easily influenced by Bollywood heroes. True. Ratna makes a good point. And Ashwini says it's very subjective. Okay, Ashwini, you're saying it's subjective in terms of people have differing views about the movie. Is that what you're saying, Ashwini? Okay. So, like I mentioned, it's not, but from what was being mentioned about the movie, it was that there was an instance of violence. Now, I believe that the violence was it physical and emotional abuse or mental abuse, or was it to do with only physical abuse of by this person? Oh, it's both. Okay. So okay. So how this movie came about? Like I said, was it about the treatment of the movie in terms of when the movie was shown? I mean, when it was, how did that sort of information be presented to the public? I think that sort of may matter. And we've had movies in the past which have constantly shown, harassment of women, and that's always taken for a thing that it's thing. And I think Pratna just had made a good point, saying that in India we all okay. No problem, Shivanshu. You want to come back online? You can come back on.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
I missed out what you just said, like a minute of it. I just missed the middle.
No, what I was saying is that since I haven't seen, but what Harshita and Ashwini mentioned was that it was subjective in terms of some people think that it was wasn't too bad. Some people are of the opinion that it was really bad. Harshita mentioned that it's both. It's physical as well as emotional abuse that was shown. And Pratna has made a point, which I think I may agree with the point that people idolize Bollywood heroes. So how is that, propagating a good message, for instance? So, and Swarnika has said that violence was normalized and treated as part of all romantic relationships. Right. So, see,
I think it's largely it's not the movie itself, perhaps, but it's more about the kind of ideas that the movie is propagating or normalizing within people.
Okay.
Because like we might that's it. Yeah.
Okay. So see, what I would say is that Bollywood movies have traditionally shown things which are sort of putting women down or showing the harassment of women, or to the extent even showing elements of men stalking women as being something completely normal. So the treatment that they've been giving women in movies and especially Bollywood has been there for a very long time. Why Kabir Singh specifically does create such an issue? Like I said, till I watch the movie, I will not be able to think. But if you're saying that violence was normalized and treated as part of all romantic relationships, here's where I'm going to play a bit of a other side argument. I'll try and give you. Now, when you say that violence, sorry.
No, I was just saying, yeah, makes sense.
No, so I'm just going to. What I'm trying to say is that now there are certain ground realities, right? Now, one of the realities is that there is a substantial amount of abuse. I'm not saying that that is okay. That's not my point at all. My point is that abuse is a reality, right? Domestic violence, abuse against individuals, against partners, these are ground realities. So one is that if you say that this was subjective, as was pointed out, that this was subjective, some people may have looked at it and said that, you know what, this is showing ground realities. Somebody would look at it saying that this is propagating violence. Right? Now, people will have differing views about this. We'll have differing views about this because one is that, I completely agree with Pratna about the whole idolizing Bollywood situation. So it does propagate that, right? But the other flip side of the argument is going to be that, hey, listen, you know what? Kabir Singh showed what actually happens. And do we have sort of ostrich mentality and say that, put a head in the sand and say that, no, this is not the way things happen. And in effect, they do happen that way. Right? So if you're saying that it attempted to normalize, I think that's completely wrong. That if they're trying to normalize it and show that romantic relationships are based on abuse, I think that's completely wrong. The manner of treatment is wrong. But I do remember that even the director made a very controversial statement. He had made a very controversial statement, right? There was some really statement that
he said that I think it went along the lines of saying something like that. Since love is an intense emotion, its expression can also be intense at times. I think Harshita just commented saying that love entails a little physical violence. That's what he said. So that also play. I think the intention of the director then obviously then does play into what was depicted, right? Like we might say that it might just be a depiction of what happens in real life, but if the director intends to let that situation exist as it does, does that account for any sort of responsibility when the intention is very clear?
Yeah, so I'll tell you now, the thing is about the director, an interesting point that you just raised about the director is that now when the director made a statement like that, the statement that he says love entails a little physical violence, now that shows that the director comes from a mindset of abuse, right? And I don't mean to sort of comment necessarily on his personal life, but I won't be surprised if he does subject people to or women in his life to abuse as well. That's something that he possibly does. That's outside the purview of what we're talking about. I think that somebody pointed out the movie called Thappad. Swanika movie Thappad. They showed different forms of abuse, including domestic violence, but the underlying idea did portray it in a negative light. I think that's which is I think a fairly recent movie. I've seen the trailer for that one, where husband-wife scenario, the guy gets drunk, he slaps the wife, and that's the movie is based on that aspect, right? And then she seeks a divorce. I think that's what the sort of premise of the movie is. See, now again, when you talk about how many of you know what the rating of Kabir Singh was, for instance? What was the rating? Certification. What certification was given? Do you know if it was given an A or UA or what sort of certification it was given? Does anybody have an idea about that?
I think it was A because of the language.
Oh, because of the language, not because of.
I'm not entirely sure about that, sir.
Okay. So maybe, so from that point of view, the regulation intended to show adults this. A. So the rating was A for that thing. Okay. So the adults, it was possibly for adults, and the law is very clear that anyone over the age of 18 is regarded as an adult in respect to. For the language, okay, that's interesting that it was only for the language. But also, was it the movie portray the violence on sort of regular feature sort of a situation, or was it that like the movie Thappad, it was about at one particular act, or was it that was a continuing sort of physical abuse? What one time? Okay, so if like I said, the director itself is possibly one of those individuals who's okay with sort of violence and wants to show that his misogyny is what is being projected on screen, for instance. So maybe that's what the thing is. But why it was allowed to be shown, if anybody did have a problem with the movie in itself, I think if the movie was to be taken to court, how the court would treat it, again, I would say that it's like I said, like I was mentioned earlier, that this movie was fairly subjective in its approach with respect to how people view it. Some people say it's okay, some people say it's not okay. And there was drug use as well. Okay. And so when you say drug use, was there any trigger warning or any warnings with respect to the drug use in the movie? Okay. So because of drug use and expletive language. Okay. So that means it had nothing to do with the physical sort of violence. It was just to do with the aspect of drug abuse and okay. So yeah, I'll just quite honestly, I would say that certification board would have given the A rating, and I guess the idea would be that even if it was to go to court, the court would probably say that this is something which has been certified as A, so it's only meant for adults, and they say that adults are more mature, supposedly more mature audience, and they should be in a position to sort of treat this in the manner in which, well, the director intended. Although my personal opinion is probably the director intended this to be putting forward his misogynistic views. Right? Okay. Coming to the next case of Tata Press versus MTNL. Right here, where the Supreme Court has held that even a commercial commercial advertisement, it amounts to free speech. It's restricted only by virtue of Article 19. These are very important to see that now, although MTNL, the Tata Press and MTNL was to do with Yellow Pages, anyone aware that we used to have, we used to have something called Yellow Pages, Tata Yellow Pages, which had sort of thing. Okay, I'm just going to stop right now for a minute. I'm just going to read your comments here. Bianca has said that what violence actually encompasses something a very small section of Indian population actually knows. Mental torture, the extent of physical torture necessary to reach the threshold of domestic violence is very low. People are generally unaware of this, owing to the romanticism propagated through movies, where despite the behavior of the man, women are generally shown to finally forgive them. Okay, yeah, I think, Priyanka, you made an interesting point because general mentality in society is, it happened. It's okay. I think it's up for you to forgive this individual. Instead of kind of coming to saying that the person should take responsibility, we'll come to the point saying that, oh, he must have been provoked. I think that's the most ridiculous argument I've ever heard of people saying that, oh, he must have been provoked and you must have done something to provoke him. I think abuse in any manner is not acceptable whatsoever. So it is something which I think what Priyanka point out is important. Vidushi is saying, do you think such inherently wrong acts can be projected to the audience with a mere trigger warning as to the contents of drug use, explicit and abuse, or do you think such films should not be screened, keeping in mind the impact it has on the masses? I am of the opinion that movies should be screened. Right? Because I am one for free speech. Because at what point will you, where do you draw the line? I mean, I draw the line at immediate call for violence. When you talk about free speech, and when I say immediate call for violence, maybe because I'm saying that I'm in a position to differ between what movies are supposed to do in terms of, not necessarily have a message, or even if they have a message, I view it from that particular perspective, saying that this is what the person wanted to sort of try and portray. And I don't let it sort of, filter down to my existence. I don't get the thing, but this is my personal opinion. You talk about the masses, even with trigger warnings, even with warnings, right, that as it was earlier pointed out, that people will idolize these people and say that, oh, okay, this individual has done this, so it is okay to do that. And it's happened. I get it. It's happened in the past, right? But because I'm pretty much for free speech, even though I despise some of the content which is coming out, I still say that it falls within the ambit of free speech. So I would say that trigger warnings and explicit warnings about this being about abuse should be there, but people should be allowed to make a choice as to whether they should watch it or not. So I'm of that opinion, Vidushi. I'm happy to be corrected and told that I'm wrong, or that's okay to do as well. Okay. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Okay. All right. So I think we're done now. It's 4 o'clock. So we have a few. I don't know if PT is available. Maybe I could take one more hour next time, but yeah. That's right, Vidushi. I think you need to find some sort of middle ground. That's true. That's true. Okay, so my time is up right now. So I'm just going to ask, if you are online by any chance? I don't know whether I'm supposed to continue or what am I supposed to do. I mean, my time is up now. So maybe if you'd like to have one more session, when do your classes get over? Anybody? When your sessions completely get over? You haven't finished this. Sorry. Can anybody tell me? I mean, it's already 4, so we're out of time right now. But can anybody tell me if you have a session? Not tomorrow. I have another session, but day after. If you like, we can finish this day after, maybe 1 hour session. So depending on what your schedules are like. Oh, attendance. Okay. So how does this happen?
Just a minute. I will tell you students for attendance. Division A, please put your roll numbers first. Only Division A. Anybody is from Division A now? Don't put Division D, E, please. Wait for some time. Division B now.
Okay, Piano.
Sir?
Yeah.
So would it be possible for you to share your presentation